Imagine building a life with a man you trusted, sacrificing all you have to make him successful. You and your family trusted him with love, but in an instant everything changed. Meet Chijioke, a man who's divorced her wife, after becoming a successful businessman. He abandoned his wife Adesua for a young, exciting, beautiful young lady. Chijioke thought life is all until the unexpected happened. But will Chijioke found love again or not? Stay tuned, for you won't believe what happens next, and if it is your first time here, subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated of our next upload. Now let's dive into the full story. Adesua leaned back in the plush armchair of their spacious Lagos home, her fingers tracing the embroidered pattern on her wrapper. From the outside, her life seemed enviable. Married to Chijioke, a charismatic and ambitious entrepreneur, and raising 2 beautiful children, their family was the image of success. But as the evening breeze rustled the silk curtains, Adesua's heart felt heavy. Beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect life, cracks had begun to show. It hadn't always been this way. Adesua remembered the early days of their marriage, a time when love was simple and untainted by the complexities of wealth and status. Back then, Chijioke was a struggling businessman with big dreams, and she had been his biggest cheerleader. Together, they weathered financial storms, sharing bowls of hotty-goosey soup in their tiny apartment and dreaming of better days. She had sacrificed her teaching career to support his growing business, managing the home and raising their children while he pursued success. Chijioke's rise to prominence had been swift. His logistics company, Chijioke Ventures, became a household name, and with its success came a new lifestyle. Fancy cars, an upscale home in Lekki, and connections with influential people. But as Chijioke climbed the ladder of success, Adesua felt him slipping away. It started with late nights at the office. At first, Adesua brushed off her concerns, reasoning that his hard work was for the family. Then came the unexplained trips and hushed phone calls. She tried to ignore the unease gnawing at her, clinging to the belief that her husband remained the man she married. One evening, as she tucked their youngest child, Kamsi, into bed, Chijioke arrived home unusually late. His cologne, a new, expensive brand she didn't recognize, filled the air as he breezed past her without a word. His phone buzzed incessantly in his hand, and his expression was distracted. "Welcome, my husband," Adesua greeted, hoping for even a glimmer of the affection they once shared. Chijioke glanced at her briefly, muttering, "Good evening," before disappearing into the study. Adesua stood frozen, the words hanging in the air like an unanswered question. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Something had changed. The following day, she confided in her closest friend, Titi, over a steaming plate of jollof rice. "Titi, I don't know what to do. Chijioke is so distant these days. It's like he's a stranger in our own home." Titi, always the pragmatic one, leaned forward. "Adesua, you need to talk to him. A marriage can't survive on silence. Ask him what's going on." Encouraged by Titi's advice, Adesua resolved to confront her husband. That evening, she prepared his favorite meal, grilled fish and yam with pepper sauce, and waited for him to come home. But when Chijioke walked through the door, he wasn't alone. A striking young woman, dressed in a sleek red gown, stood beside him. "Adesua, meet Ngozi," Chijioke announced casually, as if introducing a colleague. "She's helping with the company's expansion project." Adesua's heart sank, but she forced a polite smile. "Welcome," she murmured, her eyes scanning Ngozi's overly familiar demeanor with Chijioke. The dinner was awkward, with Ngozi dominating the conversation and Chijioke laughing at her jokes. Adesua sat silently, her mind racing. Was this the source of her unease? Later that night, as Chijioke prepared for bed, Adesua mustered the courage to speak. "Who is Ngozi?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "She's just a colleague," Chijioke replied dismissively. "Don't make something out of nothing." But Adesua's instincts told her otherwise. The lingering glances between them, the late nights, the scent of a different perfume on his clothes, it all painted a picture she couldn't ignore. As days turned into weeks, Adesua's suspicions deepened. She noticed more signs. Chijioke's unexplained absences, the whispers that followed her at church, and the way Ngozi's name seemed to come up too often in conversations. Her breaking point came one fateful afternoon. While tidying up the living room, she stumbled upon a receipt for an expensive piece of jewelry. It wasn't for her. Adesua's hands trembled as she clutched the receipt. The weight of her sacrifices, the years of loyalty and love, bore down on her like a heavy burden. For the first time, she realized the depth of Chijioke's betrayal. That night, as she lay in bed beside her husband, who was already fast asleep, tears streamed down her face. Adesua knew that their perfect illusion was crumbling, and she would soon have to make a choice: fight for her marriage or protect herself from further heartbreak. Adesua awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. It was a text from Titi. "Let's meet today. I need to tell you something important." Curiosity and dread filled her as she dressed for their meeting. Titi's cryptic tone suggested something serious, and Adesua braced herself for whatever news awaited her. At the cafe, Titi's expression was grim. She leaned forward and whispered, "Adesua, I didn't want to say this before, but I've been hearing things about Chijioke and Ngozi. People are talking." Adesua's stomach churned. "What are they saying?" "They say she's more than just a colleague. I thought it was just gossip, but now I think you need to know the truth." Adesua's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I need proof, Titi. I can't accuse my husband based on rumors." Titi hesitated before pulling out her phone. She showed Adesua a series of photos. Chijioke and Ngozi at a hotel, their closeness unmistakable. Adesua felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. She stared at the images, her heart pounding. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a reality. When she returned home, Adesua confronted Chijioke. She showed him the photos, her voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Explain this," she demanded. Chijioke's face darkened, but instead of apologizing, he lashed out. "You're spying on me now. Is this what you've reduced yourself to?" The argument escalated, with Chijioke accusing Adesua of being insecure and ungrateful. Adesua, overwhelmed by his deflection, realized that Chijioke had no intention of taking responsibility for his actions. That night, as Adesua cried herself to sleep, she resolved to take control of her life. The cracks in their foundation were too deep to ignore, and she knew that change was inevitable. Adesua avoided Chijioke for days. She busied herself with the children, preparing their meals, helping them with homework, and pretending that life was normal. But beneath the surface, her mind churned with thoughts of betrayal and heartbreak. The photos Titi had shown her haunted her, a constant reminder of how far her marriage had fallen. Chijioke, on the other hand, acted as though nothing had happened. He went about his routine, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. He didn't even attempt to address the argument that had exploded between them days earlier. This only deepened Adesua's resentment. One evening, as the children played outside, Adesua sat at the dining table with her laptop. She hadn't used her teaching qualifications in years, but now she felt an urge to explore her options. A job meant independence, a way to reclaim her identity and not rely entirely on Chijioke. As she browsed job listings, Chijioke walked in. Seeing her at the table, he scoffed. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone laced with irritation. "I'm looking for a job," Adesua replied without looking up. "A job," he repeated, laughing. "Do you even remember how to work after all these years of sitting at home?" His words stung, but Adesua refused to let him see her pain. She met his gaze with steel in her eyes. "Yes, Chijioke. Job. I need something to keep me busy while you're out there working." Her jab wasn't lost on him. He slammed his briefcase onto the table. "So this is what we've come to. You throwing accusations every chance you get. Let me remind you, Adesua, that this lifestyle you enjoy is because of me." Adesua rose to her feet, her voice steady despite the fury building within her. "And let me remind you, Chijioke, that this family is because of me. I gave up everything for you, for us. And this is how you repay me." Chijioke stared at her for a moment, then turned and walked away, leaving Adesua standing there, her hands trembling. That night, after putting the children to bed, Adesua found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. Pictures of their wedding day, family vacations, and birthday celebrations filled the screen. Each image was a reminder of the love they once shared, a love that now felt like a distant memory. She clutched her phone to her chest and whispered a prayer. God, please guide me. I don't know what to do. A week later, Adesua decided to follow Chijioke. He had left the house in his usual hurry, claiming he had a meeting with clients. But Adesua's intuition told her otherwise. She called Titi, who reluctantly agreed to join her. This is dangerous, Adesua. Are you sure about this? Titi asked as they sat in Adesua's car, parked a short distance from Chijioke's office. I need to know the truth, Adesua replied. I can't live like this anymore. They waited for nearly an hour before Chijioke's sleek black SUV pulled out of the office parking lot. Adesua started the engine and followed at a safe distance. Chijioke's car weaved through Lagos traffic, eventually stopping at an upscale restaurant. Adesua and Titi parked a short distance away, watching as Chijioke stepped out of his car. A moment later, Ngozi emerged from a taxi and walked straight into his arms. Adesua's heart shattered as she watched them enter the restaurant together. Titi placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Adesua. Adesua swallowed hard, her hands gripping the steering wheel. He lied to me. Again. They waited outside the restaurant for over an hour. When Chijioke and Ngozi finally exited, they looked more like a couple than colleagues. Adesua snapped a few photos with her phone, her hands trembling with rage. When she returned home, Adesua confronted Chijioke once again. This time there was no shouting. She simply placed the photos on the dining table. Chijioke's face darkened as he looked at the evidence. So you're spying on me now? He asked coldly. Stop deflecting, Chijioke, Adesua replied, her voice steady. I deserve the truth. For a moment Chijioke seemed to falter. But then he straightened, his expression hardening. You've made up your mind, haven't you? No matter what I say, you'll always believe the worst of me. With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Adesua sat alone at the dining table, tears streaming down her face. She had hoped that confronting him would lead to some kind of resolution. Instead, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. The days that followed were tense and silent. Chijioke avoided Adesua as much as possible, and she did the same. Their children noticed the change, their once lively home now filled with a suffocating heaviness. One evening, as Adesua prepared dinner, her eldest child, Ifeoma, approached her. Mama, why are you and Papa always fighting? Adesua's heart broke at the question. She knelt down and pulled Ifeoma into a hug. We're just going through a rough patch, my dear. But don't worry, everything will be okay. But Adesua wasn't sure she believed her own words. Later that night, while Chijioke was out, Adesua received a call from a friend who worked at a law firm. Adesua, I don't know how to tell you this, but Chijioke was here today. He's drawing up divorce papers. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Divorce. After everything they'd been through. When Chijioke returned home that night, Adesua was waiting for him. Is it true? She asked, holding back tears. Are you planning to divorce me? Chijioke's expression was unreadable. I think it's for the best, he said flatly. Adesua's knees buckled, and she sank into the nearest chair. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed so much for, was walking away without a fight. But as the reality sank in, Adesua felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. If Chijioke wanted to leave, she wouldn't beg him to stay. She would rebuild her life, with or without him. The days following Chijioke's shocking revelation were a blur for Adesua. She cycled between anger, despair, and a painful acceptance of the inevitable. Nights were the hardest. Lying awake in the bed they once shared, she felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. But Adesua knew she had to keep going for the sake of her children. She confided in Titi, who was livid. "He thinks he can just throw you away like yesterday's news." "No, Adesua, you're not going to let him define your worth." "I don't have a choice, Titi," Adesua replied, her voice heavy with resignation. "He's already made up his mind." But Titi wouldn't let her wallow in self-pity. Over the next few days, she helped Adesua put together a resume and apply for teaching jobs at local schools. "You're intelligent and hardworking, Adesua. It's time you start focusing on yourself," Titi said firmly. Meanwhile, Chijioke's behavior became increasingly distant. He rarely came home early, and when he did, he spent most of his time in the study, avoiding any interaction with Adesua and the children. It was as if he had already checked out of their lives. One day, Adesua received a call from a private school. They were impressed with her qualifications and wanted her to come in for an interview. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The interview went well, and Adesua was offered a teaching position. When she returned home, she couldn't wait to share the news with her children. "Mama got a new job," she announced, her smile radiant. Ifeoma and her younger siblings cheered and hugged her tightly. "Does this mean we can buy new storybooks, Mama?" Fioma asked excitedly. "Yes, my love," Adesua replied, her heart swelling with pride. That evening, as she sat at the dining table reviewing lesson plans, Adesua realized she was beginning to reclaim her independence. She didn't need Chijioke to validate her worth. She was strong, capable, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. While Adesua was finding her footing, Chijioke's world was beginning to unravel. His relationship with Ngozi, which had once seemed thrilling and new, was now fraught with tension. Ngozi's demands for attention, gifts, and time grew increasingly overwhelming. "You said you'd take me to Dubai this month," Ngozi complained one evening as they sat in a high-end restaurant. "I've been busy with work," Chijioke replied, irritation creeping into his voice. "Work? Or your family?" Ngozi snapped, crossing her arms. Chijioke sighed, feeling the weight of his choices bearing down on him. He had traded stability for chaos, love for lust, and respect for fleeting gratification. At home, the silence was deafening. He noticed the children didn't greet him as enthusiastically anymore, and Adesua carried herself with a quiet strength that both impressed and unsettled him. One evening, Chijioke returned home to find Adesua helping Ifeoma with a school project. The sight of them laughing and working together stirred something within him, a pang of guilt, perhaps, or regret for what he was throwing away. Later that night, Chijioke sat alone in the study, staring at the divorce papers. He hadn't filed them yet, and the thought of doing so filled him with dread. Was he really ready to let go of everything he had built with Adesua? His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Ngozi. "Are you coming over tonight? I miss you." Chijioke stared at the screen for a long moment before placing the phone face down on the desk. For the first time, he began to question whether Ngozi was worth the destruction of his family. The next morning, Chijioke lingered in the kitchen as Adesua prepared breakfast. "Adesua," he began hesitantly. She looked up, her expression guarded. "What is it, Chijioke?" "I wanted to say congratulations on your new job," he said awkwardly. Adesua's brows furrowed in surprise. "Thank you," she replied curtly, turning back to the stove. Chijioke hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he grabbed his briefcase and left for work, his mind clouded with doubt and regret. Chijioke's mornings began to feel heavier, his nights lonelier. Though he shared moments of laughter and intimacy with Ngozi, something vital was missing. He had believed leaving Adesua would bring him peace and freedom, but instead it created a void he couldn't fill. Home, Adesua blossomed. Her new job as a teacher brought a renewed sense of purpose, and her children flourished under her love and attention. She began hosting small gatherings with colleagues and neighbors, her laughter filling the house once more. Chijioke watched from the sidelines, each joyful moment reminding him of what he had lost. Ngozi meanwhile became more demanding. One evening, after Chijioke cancelled their dinner plans to focus on work, she unleashed a tirade. "You're always busy. If I wanted a man who ignored me, I'd have stayed single." Her outburst caught him off guard. For the first time, Chijioke wondered if he had been blinded by her allure, mistaking infatuation for love. He tried to make amends by showering her with gifts, but Ngozi's dissatisfaction grew. At work, whispers of Chijioke's personal life began to circulate. His colleagues, once respectful and warm, now regarded him with a mix of pity and judgment. "A man who abandons his wife for a mistress can't be trusted," he overheard one person say. The words stung, their truth cutting deeper than he cared to admit. As Chijioke's world began to crumble, Adesua's continued to rise. Her determination earned her a promotion at work, and her children excelled in school. Ifeoma, once shy and reserved, was elected class captain. At the school's award ceremony, Adesua beamed with pride as Ifeoma accepted her certificate. Chijioke, too ashamed to attend, sat in his office with his head in his hands. His once proud reputation as a successful businessman was now overshadowed by rumors of his infidelity. Deals he had worked years to secure fell through, with clients citing his unreliable character as the reason. Ngozi's patience wore thin. "You're not the man I thought you were," she said coldly one evening. "You promised me a life of excitement, but all you've brought is baggage." Their breakup was swift and brutal. Ngozi left without looking back, leaving Chijioke to wallow in the emptiness of his choices. At home, the gap between Chijioke and his family widened. He tried to reconnect with his children, but they met him with indifference. "Why should we listen to you?" Ifeoma asked one evening. "You don't even want to be here." Her words pierced his heart. Desperate to make amends, Chijioke reached out to Adesua. "I made a mistake," he admitted, tears streaming down his face. "Please let me come back." Adesua regarded him calmly. "Chijioke, you made your choice. Now you must live with it. The children and I have moved on." Her words were final, a mirror reflecting the consequences of his actions. Months passed, and Chijioke's life unraveled further. His once thriving business faced bankruptcy. His friends distanced themselves, and the weight of his loneliness grew unbearable. Adesua, however, flourished. She used her promotion to invest in her children's futures and began volunteering at a women's empowerment group, sharing her story to inspire others. She became a symbol of resilience in the community, her strength admired by all. One day, as Chijioke walked through the bustling market, he saw Adesua laughing with her children. Her radiance was undeniable, her happiness untouched by his absence. The pang of regret in his chest was unbearable. He approached her hesitantly, hoping for a chance to apologize. "Adesua," he began, his voice trembling. "I am sorry for everything, for breaking our family, for hurting you. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you can find it in your heart." Adesua looked at him, her expression soft but resolute. "Chijioke, I've forgiven you for my own peace. But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the past. I've built a new life for myself and our children, and we are happy. That's all that matters now." Her words marked the end of their chapter. Chijioke walked away, burdened by the weight of his choices. He had lost everything because of his greed and betrayal, and now he had to live with the consequences. For Adesua, the future was bright. She had turned her pain into power, her heartbreak into hope. She taught her children the value of resilience, self-worth, and the importance of making choices that honor one's truth. And as the sun set over the town that evening, it was clear. Karma had played its role, delivering justice to all. Here are some moral lessons we can learn from the story. Choices have consequences. Decisions made in moments of selfishness or infatuation can lead to long-lasting regret. Chijioke's choices ultimately destroyed his happiness and reputation. Value loyalty and commitment. Relationships built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect are the foundation of lasting happiness. Betraying those values leads to loss and regret. Resilience brings reward. Adesua's strength and perseverance in the face of betrayal allowed her to rebuild her life and find happiness, proving that pain can be transformed into power. Karma is unforgiving. Actions, whether good or bad, have a way of coming back. Chijioke's betrayal resulted in loneliness, financial ruin, and loss, while Adesua's faithfulness and strength brought her success and respect. Forgiveness brings peace, not reconciliation. Forgiving someone doesn't mean returning to the past. Adesua forgave Chijioke but chose to prioritize her peace and move forward. The importance of integrity. A strong character and ethical behavior lead to lasting respect and success. Chijioke's moral failings caused his downfall, while Adesua's integrity elevated her. Family bonds are precious. Nurturing and protecting family relationships should always be a priority. Chijioke's neglect of his family led to irreparable damage, while Adesua's devotion strengthened hers. Thank you for watching. But don't forget to like, subscribe and share with your loved one. And also, let's know your thought in the comment section and where you are watching from.